Hi, Roy. Good afternoon.
Hey Warren, good afternoon, or I should say good evening here, at least on the East Coast. How you doing?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are tuning in all over the world today. Welcome to Space 1999. This episode,
We appreciate you tuning in as always, and we're very happy to be here. And real quick, I just thought it'd be just to acknowledge everything that's been happening this week to the folks in California, just to let everybody know we are thinking about them. They're in our thoughts and prayers in the affected areas that has happened with all the fires. So just wanted to put that message out there to the folks.
yes, absolutely. And our very special guest joining us is actually from those parts. So we're going to check in with Mateo here in just a second after we run that beautiful intro. And we'll be talking about this is episode 12, Roy, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I'll give you the IT summary for that, and it goes as follows. Grim danger emerges from the past. Moonbase Alpha is threatened with destruction from an unknown manned spacecraft sent up by Earth many years earlier, with tragedy in its wake. Even worse lies ahead from outer space victims seeking revenge. And of course, we were talking about episode number 12 of year one, which is Voyager's Return.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll be back in a moment.
Pretty
Well,
awesome.
wonderful. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you, and welcome to Mateo Latosa. Mateo, you're doing well, and you're staying safe out there with all those fires, right?
Yeah, for us, it's just about a smoke where I live, anyway.
We're happy to hear that, at least, Mateo. At least from where your standpoint of where you are. So glad to hear you and your family are safe. It's been really, I mean, no words for what's been happening there.
Yeah, it's incredible the amount of acreage just burned,
Yeah,
homes
gone,
lost,
gone.
people's lives. Crazy.
Yeah. But on a positive note, we are here to talk about this first season episode of Space 1999, Voyager's Return. And this is actually episode 12. So we are actually halfway done with the first season after we discussed this episode, which is pretty amazing. Isn't it, Warren?
Yeah, I can't believe it. I mean, I guess we started this back in October,
Yeah.
and 3 months ago. So pretty remarkable. We've had a lot of fun and a lot of great guests so far, and today's going to be no different with Mateo. And this is a fun episode too. It's one in my mind that it's not say as memorable as like a another time another place or Black Sun or Dragon's Domain, but when I was a kid there's a lot of really neat elements that stuck with me all those years, and then upon the rewatch that I had in the 80s, even just the continual countdown on the monitors, just that stuck with me, and some incredible guest performances as well. And the other big thing is really some nice world building with this episode, with the backstories of not only the space program, but Paul Morrow, and some nice character motivations as well. So, fellas, what's your thoughts and takes on it?
Go ahead, Mateo.
Well, I found it very interesting that, if, for example, in John Muir's novel *The Forsaken*, he based a lot of the character of Paul Morrow and his background on this episode. The fact that he had been tragically affected by, I believe it was Voyager 2,
Right.
And that had left Morrow in a sort of on his own, trying to fulfill, the fact that he had been helped by family and always feeling that he wasn't good enough. And I thought it was interesting for John to take so many cues from this particular episode to flesh out Morrow's character.
No, and and I'm going to apologize right up front. I have not read the novelization, and that's shame on me. And I know there are so many wonderful stories, and I would love to read John's take on that too, because really losing your dad, and it's expressed through Morrow, that's how we find out about it, would definitely have a huge impact on him personally, and also potentially shape his personality, and also maybe career decisions and the direction of where he was going with his life and everything. So definitely on my checklist of things to do as far as reading it. But to Warren's point, having that background of information about the characters and learning about them, it really just adds to the backstory of one of the supporting characters of the show. So that's really cool that John went in that direction with that, and that it's pretty cool.
It's also interesting, I think, in the episode itself, how Morrow, when he learns about who Ernst Queller is, how his reaction differs from that of Jim Haynes, just because of his difference in age and
Right.
a certain level of maturity. Clearly, his reaction is much more controlled, angry, but controlled.
Yeah, and Paul definitely has his moments where he can be, I don't want to say explosive, but his temper definitely can raise. I mean, I think it was a little bit more subdued in the earlier year one episodes, but then as the character began to evolve throughout, we basically saw that, he could be a force to be reckoned with. And the scene where they're in the command conference and they're discussing what this is, and that they found out what this is, he doesn't hold back. But to your point, he's more controlled about it. He's not like running out to find Queller and to go after him. Whereas with Jim Haynes, I'll say he's reacting with his emotions. He's younger, and he goes in the direction that he does, which we know in regards to the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Different takes, but it's well dramatized in the writing of the episode as well.
Well, and Morrow, even just, what he is a little more. I mean, he does react because he lost one parent, but then he says at one point, I mean, as far as who Queller really is, not even to Jim Haynes, he lost both his parents, to the Voyager and the tragedy there. So he's sort of taking it and amplifying how somebody else would feel, and that being Jim, of course, at the same time. So, no, I thought it was wonderfully done. What can you say about Jeremy Kemp? My goodness, just incredible performance. And Roy and I were talking about him, and of course he went on years later to actually play Captain Picard's brother in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, which I was actually watching last night, incidentally, the episode, the fourth season, second episode of the fourth season, which is entitled Family, and playing, like you just said, Captain Picard's brother, Robert, and excellent actor.
Yeah, for sure. I remember him from a cheesy 1980s movie as well, with Val Kilmer.
Yes. Yes.
I think it was Top Secret.
Yes, that's it. By the Zucker brothers, if I remember correctly, the same people that brought you. Actually, I think it was 1980. I think that came out a little later than 80, though. I think it was like 1984. But that was by the same people that brought you Airplane and Airplane 2. That same type of humor. But yeah, it's really, really good. but very classically trained. He, in fact, he did King Lear with Sir Laurence Olivier back in for a TV movie that was back in 1983, which I thought was pretty cool. King
That
Lear.
one I wasn't aware of. For the episode as well, for me, I mean, it was I again, those little things, and I remembered that graphic they put up on the big screen, and of course there's some really good interaction with the eagles and things like that. Also, the opening shot when the one eagle blows up, I found very dark and traumatic. The way the astronaut sort of you see the explosion and he gets sucked out into space at the same time.
Now, here's the thing with that, and I'm glad you brought that up, Warren, because he's saying Eagle 2 is out of control, and he goes, ship is falling apart, and he goes, it's too late. It's almost like he's going to, when he says it's too late, almost like he was almost thinking about ejecting. And here's the thing. If he were to be ejecting, he doesn't have his helmet on, he doesn't have his oxygen pack, he doesn't have any of that. But of course, you're caught in the emotion of what's happening, and you want to get out of there. But obviously, if you're going to get out of there, you're not going to make it because you don't have the necessary gear on. And then he goes forward, and the effect, even with him lurching forward, the way they did that, I mean, it's boom, instantaneous, but it was so well done. And then the eagle just, disintegrates from the Queller drive. Definitely a very intense opening. And then as, for the teaser, but then when it comes back, I love the opening where, when, the main credits, it's saying Voyager's return. And the eagle is Alan's eagle is just like spiraling back. It was just a beautiful effect. The music that they used for that is the opening music that is used. It's the opening cue music that they use in the opening of Breakaway, which has always been a favorite. And they're playing that. It just works so very well. And it just dramatizes everything and comes together. And, Helena makes the comment, she's hoping that it's pretty much, the monitors that's having the problem. Although to me, she's really in response to Alan knowing that Eagle 2 was blown up because they're all watching on the screen when all this happens. And then, he's able to stabilize it and make it back. But you still don't know if he's going to make it back because there's smoke coming from the instrument panels. The ship almost blew up. He was only lucky because he was further on back from where Eagle 2 was. Eagle 2 was kind of closer to where Voyager was when it was pretty much coming at them with the Queller drive.
Yeah, for sure. Mateo, do you have any recollections of watching this for the first time or when you were younger?
Oh, I don't know that I can remember what I was feeling when I watched it. I did watch it on its initial run because I remember watching Breakaway when the very first time it aired in New York City. And so I caught every episode that came after that. I think the only one I missed was War Games. And I think the reason was because they ran it on a different night during the week. It was a Wednesday night, and they ran it as 2 episodes, one after the other.
They did Breakaway and they did War Games combined, Mateo. And I actually, it's crazy because we've talked about this before on the show, or actually,
this is the famous WPIX, right?
It is WPX 11. And I remember do you remember Two Guys, Mateo, back in the day?
Yes.
I remember going to Two Guys with my parents, and we went there and we got some stuff. And I actually got my first model Eagle kit that night. And I think I remember they got it for me. It was like $1.99 back in the day. And it's the, can't probably see it, the poster in the background, but the MPC. And I remember getting home, watching that 2-parter and getting my glue out, and I was trying to put the eagle together, and I was trying to get the eagle to look like it was looking on the screen. And for some reason it wasn't happening. But yeah, that great memories of that.
So I'd never heard that before. So they actually aired Breakaway and War Games together.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the other episode was, but I knew War Games was one of them.
Yeah, Breakaway was first, and then it was War Games, and then they went right into, at the end of Breakaway, they went right into the. They didn't even do the credits for War Games.
Well, I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say, but I was 11, and my parents said, "Oh, you're not watching that on a school night. You're going to bed."
I was lucky, and how old was I? I was not, well, I was 75, so I was not, I was 9. I got lucky.
Wow. Well, I mean, we'll have to ask David Hirsch, but I'm sure that would have been the inspiration for them to compile Breakaway and War Games together for Alien Attack.
I'm sure it was.
You know, because it probably played so well, and PIX probably got the ratings back on it, and then when you turn it around, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that Destination Moonbase Alpha was commissioned and put together over in the UK, but then Alien Attack was done in New York.
Not sure about that, but I can tell you that with the Bringers of Wonder Part 1 and Part 2, WPIX did do a special showing after 1999 was, the show had been, I'll say, I hate to use the word canceled, but it had been canceled. It was probably around 1970, I'm going to say 78, 79. They were doing a special presentation. In fact, if you go online on because there's a Facebook page for WPIX Channel 11, and they'll show ads from the past. One of the ads that they actually have is saying that a special 2-hour episode of Space 1999, and it's the Bringers of Wonder. And what they did was, like what they did with Breakaway and War Games, they did the same thing, and they put the 2 episodes together. And of course, it's a part 1, part 2, so it even worked even better with that. So you only have that. And that's, of course, what you just, you were saying too, Warren, with Destination Moonbase Alpha, when they did the theatrical release in Europe, it was the same type of scenario, only then they built special scenes around it and what have you.
Yeah.
Did they use the original opening theme though in the one that you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. It was basically just running the episodes. It wasn't Destination Moonbase Alpha. It was just it was
Just
Space
ran part
19.
1 and part 2 back to back. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what they did. Yeah.
I don't know if I mean, obviously I've been involved with the new books, the old books, but this particular episode had an impact on the original authors because John Rankin, who wrote the original novelization of this episode, was fascinated, I should say, by the Voyager black box.
Mm.
And it comes back in later novelizations from the 70s. It wasn't added in by us later. It was actually, he refers to it a few times in the later books, Lunar Attack and an Astral Quest.
Okay.
And Brian Ball wrote a short story focused on Queller and Haynes that took place simultaneously to Breakaway.
Oh.
And was one of the early stories in Shepherd Moon. So he actually placed his story and interwove it into Breakaway and wrote it about Queller and Haynes. And then later on, or rather I should say earlier on, in Survival, he shows Haynes' death and he brings him back and he gets killed during the Lara invasion of Alpha. And so it's interesting how even the original authors, who weren't necessarily fans per se, they liked the series enough to learn who the characters were and these type of things like Voyager's Black Box and build them into their later books and original novels, novelizations and the original novels in the 70s ones.
That's really cool.
They were trying to build in their own continuity.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
Very because
nice.
in Android Planet and I believe at least in Android Planet, maybe in Phoenix of Megaron as well, there are references to these planets already being recorded in Voyager's black box.
Wow, very cool. And again, I'm sad to say I own those books and I have not read them. And and I've had those books for years. So again, shame on me for that. But that's wonderful to hear, though.
Roy, I envy you because you have the opportunity now to read those books for the first time.
Yeah.
I've read them so many times and then re-edited them to fit into the Powers First continuity that there's no surprises for me anymore. But wow, I envy you being able to read them for the first time.
No, that's and I appreciate you telling us this information because that to me that's exciting because to your point, it's like, how cool is that? I mean, it's like something brand new when it comes to discovering new tidbits about the series. I mean, it's always very, very exciting, and it's something that does not happen every day, obviously, because the show's been around for 50 years. We're fans to the level that we are, so when something does like that happen, it's definitely a special moment. So thank you for that, Mateo.
I think in a sense, I think you'll agree with me that we as fans, when we meet people like Catherine Shell, we're hoping that she had an emotional or investment in her character that she portrayed, and that we imagine that she'd care, that an original novel that focused on her character would do that character justice. And I mean, she wrote the forward to David McKinty, the late David McKinty's book Born for Adversity. She wrote the forward and the afterword for that. And but I know that when I met her in 2000, she said it was a job. It was a job. What we imagine, we wish that they were concerned about their characters and that they cared about them. And I think to a certain extent, they do, certainly, Prentice Hancock and other people. But uh, in this sense, it's the same thing as the original authors. They were hired to write these books and were given scripts, and yet at the same time, they were given the opportunity to write original novels, and they invested themselves in them, and they invested themselves in the lore and in the details of the characters and these things. And it's very satisfying as a fan to feel that these people who didn't know the series and didn't necessarily care about it at the beginning grew to care about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it just makes you feel that there's that connection that they're having, and there's that respect that they had for the characters. And especially when it comes to continuity like that, I mean, from coming from an author, to me, I mean, we've talked about, Warren and I've talked about this before. I've talked about this in regards to other genres as well, too. Especially when we're looking at shows back in the 1960s. I'm going to reference Star Trek right away. Big classic Star Trek fan. 70s, obviously, Space 1999. There wasn't a lot of continuity that would connect the dots, so to speak. Space 1999 was very good with doing that in year one, with different, especially with the the moon being blown out of the Earth's orbit. I mean, that was the premise of the show. But even when they were going to different worlds and referencing different things that have happened, as far as them surviving and the different types of obstacles they've come across. I mean, especially I'm thinking of War Games when Koenig is talking to the alien, the alien leader, or not the leader, but the male alien, Anthony Valentine. That's when they're having that discussion about what's happened to them and everything, and he even says about God looking out for them, the mysterious unknown force with Ara. It all kind of interconnects, but really, it wasn't later until like the late 80s and 90s where television shows started doing the arc, so to speak, of connecting the stories. And it's gone to one point where it was never done, and then it's gone to a point that if you start watching a show, if you don't watch episode 1 and all the way through, if you jump in to like episode number 8, you're totally lost, because it's this long story arc that's going on, and it's not individualized anymore. So there's no sort of balance. So when you are actually getting these little trinkets that are connecting the dots, so to speak, or just references or Easter eggs, I guess is the term nowadays for that, it really is very exciting. So the fact that these authors were doing that and investing themselves with that, it's pretty neat.
Well, just think of E.C. Tubb. He did Earthfall, wherein he said they had, okay, you can write one more, there's enough in the license, you can write one more original novel. And he said, if I want to do it so that if I had invented this series, this is how I would have done it from beginning to end. A complete reimagining of the series. And that showed a lot of respect for the series to say, look, I'm going to do it as if I had done it, this is how I would have done it.
Right.
One thing I'd like to mention also, in year 2, there's, I don't know if people pay attention to these. I'm sure you guys know, but in The Exiles, Koenig talks about the Venus mission.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it isn't until at the very end of the second season that you actually have him experience these, psychic ghosts appear
in the Lambda
manifested
factor
by his guilt. of a story that he told in literally episode 2.
Yep, exactly. Again, it's really exciting because there's that reference that's taking place, and then not only is it a reference in the lambda factor, but it's a central part of the story of him having these nightmares, and it's centered around the whole ESP phenomena from that phenomena in space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I remember correctly, Mateo, in the novelization from year 2, I think they were trying to bridge that episode, that story, with the Bringers of Wonder, if I'm remembering that correctly. Do you recall that by any
Oh,
chance?
I think they were in the same book. I think they were
Yes,
in
it
the
was
Psychomorph.
Psychomorph, the fourth
Yeah.
one, right?
Yes, I believe so.
So it's like they had that experience take place with the extrasensory perception, and then they somehow linked it to the Bringers of Wonder. There was that connection where the lambda factor was actually connected somehow to the Bringers of Wonder.
I think you're right, Roy. I think you're right. Yeah. And
And I forgot, and I haven't read this in years, and I thought that was an interesting take that they went in that direction, that the author went in that direction. Was that, I'm trying to remember, was that Terrence Dix?
No, that was well, you mean the writer of the episode or the writer of the novelization?
Actually, the novelization.
That
novel
would
was
be Michael
they all
Butterworth.
were Butterworth. Right?
Butterworth, Michael Butterworth, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
He wrote
Yeah,
5 of the 6.
that's right. Yeah, it's been a while. Terrence Dix wrote the episode.
He wrote the episode.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm slipping. It's a while.
I tell you though, guys, those novels. I mean, back in the 70s, they were like gold, right? Because they were, you know, those along with say the trading card set were the only available, or maybe the model kit. But those 3 things would be like the holy grail of Space 1999 collecting back in the 70s.
That and I believe the Charlton magazines were great.
And the comic books, yeah, okay.
Now,
So there was quite a bit.
one thing I want to say, Mateo, and I'm kind of jumping the gun because I know we're going to talk more about what you've been doing and everything, but you have the year 1 novelizations and year 2. Am I correct to assume that there's a bridge for those two, for year 1 and year 2, that has been done?
Yeah, they were the John Muir's novel, The Forsaken,
Yep.
takes place after Testament of Arcadia, and then Survival, and then an early part of Children of the Gods, Johnny
Yes.
Burns' Children of the Gods, and then also a story in Shepherd Moon called, I believe, Fallen Angel, where you see the death of Jackie Crawford, and all of that took place in that middle period. There was
Right.
also a novella that eventually I didn't publish by Shane Johnson that would have taken place in the middle there, but ultimately it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
So
there's
I should say she's a good author, but I didn't publish it.
There's a lot of wonderful material out there, folks.
Now, in the year 1 and year 2 omnibus, all of the stories were placed in a new chronology because so that those connections between Bringers of Wonder and the Lambda Factor were broken.
Okay.
I asked Michael Butterworth, I gave him a list of the episodes in chronological order, and I said, look, this is how we're going to do them. So he said, okay, but I want to do it. I don't want people rewriting me. I want to do it, and I'll do the new connective passages, and I'll take away the ones that I put in there that don't work anymore. And so he did the first pass and rewrote a bunch of the stories, and he wrote the one story. What was it? That wasn't in the year 1, the year 2 books. What was the story?
Year 2.
The Tabor.
The Tabor, yeah. Okay.
He wrote that, and then I went through, and I and other people, Jonathan Blum, one of the writers of Doctor Who, we went through it and we edited for continuity.
Gotcha.
We changed some of the dialogue to better fit the dialogue as spoken on screen.
Yep.
Because Mike Butterworth only had draft scripts. Now I gave him the transcripts from Martin Willie's site, but I told him, don't worry about that. We'll handle that, and ultimately came through. So a lot of those connections that you're talking about were broken down because we ordered the episodes in production order, but in a sense, no, I shouldn't say that. We ordered them according to Helena Russell's status report dates.
Right.
Now, the earlier dates just make no sense whatsoever
Yeah,
because the metamorph takes place before Dragon's Domain, which is
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah.
But what we did do is we respected the order, even though we didn't respect the dates.
Yep.
But we ordered them by the dates. And those episodes that didn't have dates, there are some that don't have dates, like Brian the Brain doesn't have a date, and I believe some others. What we did is we put them into production order
Okay.
between the where they would fit, and we had to tweak a few because sometimes you can't go from planet to planet. You need a planet interstellar story and then another solar system story to make it kind of make some sort of sense. But we didn't mess with it too much. We just placed the ones that didn't have dates in the gaps where there were big gaps and as close to production order as we possibly could. Except that the last two episodes we flipped.
Okay.
I think we flipped the Dorcons and the Immunity Syndrome, or maybe no, I may be mistaken. I think it was Michael Butterworth who flipped them because he had them settle on that planet in the Immunity Syndrome. In the original books, he ended the series by having them settle there.
It's a nice ending, though. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Wow. Roy and I were just talking, you probably be the fella to know for sure, Mateo. In the year one novelizations, there was also one episode missing.
Yeah, Earthbound.
Earthbound. Yeah, it was.
It was mentioned in Koenig's fevered dream where Bergman shows up and he tells him, well, they found a spaceship buried on the moon and he crashed on the moon and we can take it. Just a few of us can go back to Earth. And it was just like sentences.
Okay. See, that's very interesting because you're talking about the missing link.
Yeah.
Novelization, right?
Yes.
We talked about that a few weeks ago, and it's been probably 40 years since I read those books. But the missing link was expanded, was it not? Like that whole sequence where Koenig's having the fever dream in the episode, only it happens in about a minute and a half. But didn't the original novelization really expand upon that with exactly what you were saying? Is that there was this whole section where Koenig was back on the base, and Bergman was just out of his mind with this recently discovered spacecraft.
I think some of that is in the episode. But that's where Koenig tells him, if you want to leave, check yourself out of any airlock,
Yeah.
Right.
But it's not very clear. Brian Ball was working from draft scripts at that time. And if you read the missing link in the year one omnibus, you'll see that it's greatly expanded. There are huge scenes that were dropped. And we added them back in as much as we could. We interpolated the scenes as written as the scenes as filmed. And there's a lot more ties to The Tempest by Shakespeare in the original drafts than there are in the final episode. Sure. And so at the end of that, in the year one omnibus, I wrote in a line where when they're saying goodbye to each other, Ron and Koenig, Ron quotes The Tempest to Koenig, and Koenig smiles because he recognizes the quote, because Ron tells him in the original draft scripts that they've had access to Earth's literature, the ancient books, and that there's some hint that they're not just encountering another race, they're encountering another race from the future, and that they have roots in humanity, and they're not. I don't know how literal he means that, but he does say, we know of you from the ancient books, and in that point, I inserted a quote from the Tempest that Koenig recognized to really kind of hammer that home. It's one of my prouder moments.
See, and this is an example too where having those earlier drafts is very. It's to me, it's very interesting because it's a different direction that potentially that the episode could have gone in with certain key items. I mean, we see this a lot again in the original. I'm referencing Star Trek, but the log stories, that they had, and James Blish novelizations, they would do like log 1, 2, 3, and so on. those stories were based on the earlier draft scripts, and sometimes there's more information that are in those, or deleted scenes potentially, or maybe scenes that were never even filmed. And that actually happens circling back with Voyager's return. Now, the writer of this episode was Joe Gannon, and he was, at the time, he was a young Irish writer. And interesting enough, he actually got his start with working with Pink Floyd, doing the lights for Pink Floyd. I thought that was
really
yes.
Wow.
And Johnny Byrne actually, I guess, they had the draft of the script, and the script was going to go in a different direction. And Johnny Byrne, I guess, had consulted with him as far as going in a different direction, because originally the Voyager probe was going to be arriving on the moon, and what was going to happen is the probe itself was trying to con the Alphans into having different technology so it could turn itself into a living creature.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so with that, because of production values and everything, they couldn't go in that direction. So Johnny Byrne did, got the permission, worked on it, and it definitely went in a different direction as we know it as, today. But some of the things that were cut were in regards to the experimental lab. There was going to be more build up in regards to that. It was this would have been, I believe, in the script version that was not the final shooting script, but then it was changed because, as we know, that there's amendments, there's red pages, blue pages that are done. But originally, when it was done, this section of Alpha, with this experimental lab, was more concentrated on. There was more information about it. One of the scenes that was changed was the end sequence. Instead of having Koenig go to meet with Haynes, what's happening is they're almost having a command conference at the end. Paul asks Koenig, why did Queller not remote control Voyager, Voyager 1, to do what he had to do and be on it? And then Koenig basically responds and says, that's something that only Queller would know. Because really, you think about it. But then, to me, one of the tipping lines in there too, why he does, and I actually caught it when I was rewatching the episode just yesterday. Right after Queller, Queller is recuperating, he's talking to Helena about everything, and then he's as she's talking and he's telling and saying that he really never wanted to hurt anybody. It was all for mankind. And then Helena says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He makes the comment, so is the road to heaven too. So to me, he was trying to make up for everything that had happened, the people that had died previously, and that's why he was doing it. I mean, the guilt that he was carrying, not only for the different societies that had been killed on the different planets, but that the colony that had been killed in the community, as it's referenced. That community would have been a community potentially on the moon of scientists that were working on the project of Voyager to go out into space. But of course, it was decimated. It was wiped out because of the Queller drive cutting in too soon. Every time I watch this episode, I'm thinking this was launched on Earth. But reading that this potentially had taken place on the moon makes even more sense, in regards to a space probe going out, and then the decimation happening because of, the Queller drive cutting in too soon with Voyager 2. But again, this discussion was in that earlier shooting draft, but then was changed, and then it had Koenig meeting with Queller, which is the final episode. But I thought that would have been interesting if they had gone with that instead of what they went with. The other one last comment is too, Helena comments about how many other races could have been affected, because Earth has been sending up a lot of probes out into space, and how many other more civilizations could have been affected, and by what we had done as a human race, trying to explore the galaxy, so to speak, and potentially have decimated other planets, not even knowing, because of a form of contamination.
Interesting. It really is interesting what you just said, because it places shines a lot of light on what Brian Ball was trying to do.
Mhm.
In the story from Shepherd Moon, Queller's working on the surface, not far from the base, but he's working on the surface on some sort of installation, and there's a collapse, and he falls into basically the dust in a crater, and he can't get out, and he basically Haynes knows where he is, and there's nobody available. Everybody's so available. Everybody's so tied up with what they're trying to do to save the base with the disposal area, breaking it up, that he goes out to save him. And in a sense, Queller feels like he doesn't have any right to be saved,
Yeah.
and certainly doesn't want Haynes to risk himself. And he's kind of like accepting that this is his fate, that he has a guilt that can only be assuaged by his death.
Right.
And so then later on in the episode, which of course takes place now after this short story, I think it's his way of, in a sense, seeking atonement and not necessarily to be forgiven, but to pay the price
Right.
for what his hubris caused. You know, they tie together rather well.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. And I the fact that he created that extra scene, that extra moment of continuity, again, it works very, very well with the characters. Yeah, it's amazing the different directions the show could have gone in with the different drafts that they had. And when you find out this information, it's kind of cool because it's the what if. And then in some instances, these scenes, these extra scenes, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, were filmed. But then what happens is, unfortunately, sometimes it winds up, winding up on the cutting room floor. And whether it be due to time or they decided to go into a different direction, and we saw a lot of that with Breakaway, and that was when we were doing the rollout, and Warren had worked on the project of inserting those so-called almost like lost scenes because of the audio that had been discovered on those tapes, and showcased it. It was showcased at the London event, and it really just adds so many layers and so much to the story. So when we even hear about these little tidbits, it's always really, really a lot of I'll say it's a lot of fun, because it's like, okay, this could have really gone in a different direction, or we could have pretty much expanded upon the characters or the different moments. For me, I would always mention, and we haven't discussed the episode yet, but Space Brain. There's that whole sequence that was cut where when Kelly and Alan Alan retrieves Kelly and is from the spacewalk. And what happens is it immediately cuts to going back to Alpha. But there's a whole sequence where Kelly is being possessed and he's trying to take over the Eagle, and he's literally trying to fly it into the space brain. And Alan is, pretty much battling him, and he has to basically stun him. And that's the only way he's able to regain control. There's a lot of promotional photos out there from that taking place. In fact, in the novelization, I remember the first time seeing it back in the 70s, in the and I forget, it's one of the later books. It actually has a photo of them fighting in the command module. So it's kind of cool when you get these little tidbits of information.
And it's in the book.
And it's in the book. Exactly. It's in the book.
Yeah, we reincorporated that scene in the year one omnibus. Also, all the audio that Warren worked on are also in the year one omnibus.
Very cool.
Patricia Sokol went through that with a fine-tooth comb and interpolated all of that missing dialogue.
Yeah. Nice.
Also, missing dialogue from Black Sun. We got copies of the draft script, the original script, and there was some really beautiful description, and she made sure that every single word was there. The only thing I changed about it was I wasn't happy with the punctuation. But I told her I'm not going to change a single word. I'm just changing some of the punctuation.
Sure.
Because I felt it just didn't flow, But other than that, we made a special effort to make sure that as much material was included as we possibly could. Guardian of Piri was vastly different.
Yeah.
And even if you read the original novelization, I mean, you can read it any day in the what's it called, the Space Guardians. Peary is a blackened, burned world that just looks like a land of milk and honey. No spheres, no, Pierian trees, none of that. And is that they're actually walking around in ash and destruction, but they don't see it.
Mm,
You know, um,
So it's
uh,
an illusion.
yeah.
yeah, the whole thing was an illusion made
Huh.
by the Guardian. We
Interesting.
we I couldn't give up the Pierian tree, so I rewrote it as it was to the episode. I rewrote that whole novelization, and then interpolated. The way I worked is I wrote the novelization myself, and then I interpolated the original novelization as much as I could to save as much as I could of the original work, just on certain episodes.
Hmm. That's very interesting. That premise sounds a lot like a new TV show I'm watching. If anybody's seen it out there, it's on Apple TV and it's called Silo. But it's essentially just that. So it's a black and decimated Earth, but people think it's a beautiful paradise and things like that. Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We touched on the black box there, and how even just a little thing like that could lead to lots of potential references down the road, which it did, of course, Mateo. But in the episode itself, I found it very interesting because the black box creates a sort of a heated debate between Helena and Victor, which we didn't quite often see throughout the series as well. But they were very staunchly on opposite sides of that whole debate there.
It's the classic scientist from the
Oh,
1950s
sure.
movie.
Yeah, 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 very much so.
Very, and they're both very passionate about it. And yeah, and you're right. It's something usually that they're pretty much in agreement with most things. And again, it's wonderful to hear that this is something that was expanded upon later on, because having all of that information, all that, I mean, that was the crux of the story. I mean, they basically could have been fine. They could have shot Voyager right out of, they could have blown it right out of this, out of space, and that would have solved their problems as far as having to deal with the Queller Drive. But they did everything to try to save that black box. And it's like, what did it contain? What was the information? How could it help them? I mean, that in itself would have been a wonderful way to have expanded upon possible stories within the series while it was in production, because as far as referencing, but again, the timing and everything, it's just the way the shows were at that time, for that to happen, and it didn't, unfortunately. But it would have been really, it's nice to hear that, from a novelization point, it did, and doors were opened up.
Well, we view it as that there are two canon. There's the televised canon,
Hmm.
and then the literary canon.
Sure.
And the literary canon includes the televised canon in terms of the retelling of every episode. But within the literary canon, it did it did have a role and it was brought back.
Yeah.
But it's sadly in the televised canon, as you know, most of the scripts in year one were written almost simultaneously, that they didn't have a chance to, for one author to say, oh, I'm going to include this element in my script. A lot of them were being written at the same time by different people.
Right.
And so, and then by year two, well, year two is year two.
Well, it's unfortunate because and on this show, Roy and I have talked about this a lot, and we've touched on it even today, that in-universe continuity that was there. It was definitely there. And Mateo, even when you go back and listen to those audio clips from Breakaway, the thing that really jumped out at me was that they referenced Gorski references Lee Russell
Mhm.
from Matter of Life and Death in the breakaway scenes, right? So there was an effort, but it just unfortunately they didn't stick with it for one reason or the other, or because of the timing and the rush that was on, and all the scripts were being farmed out to different writers, and they didn't really have anything mapped out. Like that's what they do nowadays.
Right.
With is they map out basically a year of television at a time, and so they gather everybody together in a writer's room and say, okay, this is where we're at the beginning of the year. This is where we want to be. So anything in between is up to you, but we need to hit these bullet points, right?
Right.
So it's unfortunate they couldn't have stuck with that, but I love and I'm fascinated by the idea that there was an effort originally to build in a continuity.
Well, and Mateo even referenced too, and I mean, year two did it with the Exiles and the Lambda Factor,
Yes,
which
yes,
was yeah.
exactly. And what it is in my mind, and again, sorry, Roy, but I'm going to touch on Babylon 5 because it was actually the first science fiction series to incorporate arc storytelling.
Mhm.
It was a first for that. But what it is, I think anyway, is that continuity is for the viewer, it's very rewarding. When you see something 2 years down the road that pays off, it's like, yes,
Mhm.
I remember that. I can't
Sure.
believe that. Oh, wow, they're referencing. Oh, it's rewarding for the viewer. And I think it's wonderful that Mateo's been able to do that so well with the literary works.
Well,
Absolutely.
I will say I will agree with you on live action science fiction, but not.
Okay,
But there
fair
was
enough.
a series back in 1973, and it was animated, and it had the whole series was one long arc, and it was Return to the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, of course, yeah.
Doug Wildey, he planned that whole thing out. Every episode leads directly into the next one, into the next one, into the next one.
Yeah.
Got to give them credit.
I
Nice.
remember watching that on Saturdays.
When you said 1973, I thought you were going to say The Star Lost.
Nah, that was more episodic.
No,
The Star Lost.
I mean, every show has its premise, but
Yeah.
but not to that. I was amazed that a cartoon series would have arc storytelling
that's
from
pretty
episode one.
that's pretty groundbreaking. Yeah, for sure, for sure. So listen, Mateo, we've touched on the novels, we've touched on your work with, of course, Powys. Um, can you do us a favor and just tell us how everything to do with Powys got going initially in the early stages?
Oh well, actually, it's very related to what you're doing right now. I moderated a online discussion. I think it was. I don't know if it was still online alpha or it was online alpha at that point, but I believe that it was, and it was called Episode by Episode. And we had 52 weeks in a year, obviously, and we did 48 episodes and then the 4 original novels. And each week, people would watch the episode as you're doing right now, and then discuss that episode. And all those discussions are archived someplace. I think uh, David Welly has them archived on the Metaform site, and somebody published them with all our emails and stuff in them. I don't know how we got away with it, but it's fine. And so we did them week by week, and then we did the things. And at the end of the 52 weeks, I got a call on a Sunday morning, I should say, and woke me up, and it was Johnny Byrne. Called me at home. He had
Oh,
gotten my number through Robert Reese, who goes by Robert La Boheme right now, and he had been lurking
Yeah.
in the episode by episode discussions and reading them for the year. And he
Wow.
was very interested in what we were doing. And so he called me to congratulate me on the successful year-long, thing. And we talked for a long time. And I told him about, the books that we had just finished doing. And then I said, boy, I wish that there were more. I wish that, there were more books that we could read. And I've always told the story that I had this recurring dream where I would be on a field trip for school and make a stop, and I'd go into like a used bookstore and I'd see books number 11, 14, 17, 19, because the pocketbooks only went up to 10. And of course I was like, oh my God, and I realized I didn't have any money. So I could never buy them. But I had this dream recurring, and I could never remember the titles or what the picture was. And but I knew that this was something I wish I could see. And I told him that, and he goes, "Well, why don't you do it? Why don't you publish books?" And I said, "But," he said, "Why don't you just do it?" And I said, "Well, how could I even get the rights?" And he said, "I can help you with that."
Mm.
And at the time, Space 1999 was under Carlton,
Mm.
and Johnny Byrne had done a series of television shows for Carlton, including Heartbeat, which he
Oh.
was the creator of. And he said, I've made them millions. I can call in a few favors. And they had just acquired the rights to the to all the Anderson shows and all the ITC properties. And so he went there and he met with the person. I almost remember her name. I can't remember her name right now. And she said to him, "Look, yeah, but we are still cataloging what we've acquired. We're going to need time." So he went there about, I don't know, about 6 months later and talked to her. And he was told, "Okay, well, we'll deal with it." And you know, what happened was is that they set up they made a contract with a United States based licensing agency that they would be working with American companies. And I sent them an email, I think. Well, no, the people at Carlton knew my email. I didn't know about this licensing agency. And so what happened was they were given the license, given the job of being the licensing agency, and they had one stipulation. And they told me this. I'll backtrack. They sent me an email, and I hadn't been checking that Powys email because I'd heard nothing for 2 years. So I thought, okay, whatever, and wasn't checking it. And then one day I went and checked it, and there was an email 3 weeks old from this licensing agency offering me the license.
Wow.
And so I immediately called them and I said, "I'm really sorry. I hadn't heard in such long. I stopped checking the account." And he said, no problem. We're just getting going and everything. And so we went through the negotiations, and once it was all settled, and we almost didn't do it because Carlton wanted to own the copyright to each book. No author copyrights. And I said to them, "Look, I can't afford to pay people the money it would cost to pay to do a work for hire book where they lose the copyright, but I can afford to pay really good writers a more reasonable fee if they own the copyright." And they said, no, we want to own the copyright. And I know that in England that is not the standard. In the United States, copyrights for tie-in novels are always owned by the studios. So I said to them, well, then I think our discussions are over. And I'll have to say no. Believe me, it was a bluff, but I was quaking in my boots.
Wow.
That was
eventually the license agent went back to them and gave my reasoning about getting, I had Doctor Who writers ready to go. And they said, okay. So then once we had the thing was signed and everything like that, and I sent it back and I paid the licensing fee, which you'll never guess how much the money that was. He says, "Now I can share something with you. We were given the job as being licensing agency for Carlton with one stipulation, that the first thing we do is make a contract with you."
Wow.
That was Johnny Byrne's influence.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And we had only published one book, Mary's Monster by William Latham, which we had to show to them as a proof of, the ability we could publish books. And boom, that was it. And so they told me, okay, well, this is what it's going to be. You have to pay this amount of money. And the first thing I did is I asked William Latham and I asked John Kenneth Muir to write the first two books. And then I contacted David McKinty to write the third book, which turned out to be the fourth book. But that's how it started.
That's amazing, Mateo. What a story. Wow.
Just incredible that Johnny was so involved and invested even all those years later.
And the influence that he had. I mean, that says a lot right there. My goodness.
Now, granted, he called me, I think it was August, and we met in September at the 99 convention.
Okay.
And I can't remember when we did the EXE. I don't know if we did it in 98 or 99, but I know it ended in like in August. And then it might have been a year before the convention or a month before the convention. So I met him in person, and he and John Kenneth Muir and I and Catherine Muir, we hung out together. And in fact, I took Johnny down to downtown LA, and we went to this place called La Placita Olvera, and we took him to a Mexican restaurant, and uh, he enjoyed his time with us, and so we hit it off. We became friends right then and there, and we've been friends ever since. And then of course you saw what Sandy Byrne said. I mean, which surprised me, but it was nice of you to tell me, Warren. I was unaware of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was a very touching tribute that Sandy put together
Yeah.
for Johnny that we aired at the convention in September, and yeah, I mean, very just gracious of her to tell the story of how Johnny in his last days, you would come over to see him and visit him, and had grown to be such a close personal friend, and that really meant a lot to her.
If it made me good, it made me feel good to be there for him in his last couple of weeks. I mean, he died like a week after I left, but um, it also it made things a little easier for her because she was reluctant to leave him, but she had so many things that she had to do to arrange for his care after he left that particular facility, and the doctors were telling him he would make it to Christmas, and he didn't make it to. He told, it's funny. I sent him a gift. It's like, I think of the book on the all the stories of King Arthur or something like that. I believe it was, and he usually would contact me and say, "Oh, hey, thanks for everything," but I didn't hear back. So I wanted to make sure he got it, and I called, and she said to me, "He's not here. He's in the hospital, but I'll give you the number if you want to call him." So I called him, and he told me, literally, he said to me, he said, "Mateo, if you want to see me, you need to come now, because I think I have about a month to go." And so I went to work. I got the time off, and I took about 2 weeks um, to go there, get there, be up there, and then get back to the airport and everything. And uh, and it was literally almost a month to that day that he spoke to me that he passed away.
Mm.
I mean, he knew his body, I think, more than even the doctors knew.
Yeah.
And he was bright. He slept. He had um anyway, it doesn't matter, but he slept a lot. We talked a lot, and he was able to eat anything, but he had a hard time eating. He was only able to use half of his body, so I would help him with that, and drinking and eating and things like that. So he was it's so funny. His friends would come to visit every once in a while. I'd leave the room. I mean, I didn't want to interfere, with. And but he was always, "Oh, this is my friend. He came all this way to be with me here." And so I felt I felt that that it helped him, but I think it helped Sandy just a little bit to give her that she knew he wouldn't be alone when she had to go and make arrangements.
Yeah, gave her some breathing room to do different things and take care of different things, and it says a lot too about your friendship too, Mateo. I mean, with him.
The last thing I'll say is about my friendship with Johnny Byrne is that I think after the conversation with that he called me, one of his sons had been in a really terrible car accident.
Mm.
And I didn't understand the British healthcare system.
Mm.
So I said to him, "Look, I could give you $1,000. Just you just give it to you to help pay for medical expenses if you need it." And he was so touched by that because he said, "No, no," he says, "I don't need it." He said, "We have like national health care, and and I don't need it." But I think he was very respectful of the fact that I offered what I had.
Right.
And of course, I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about their healthcare system at the time, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Totally different.
So,
That entire tribute, Mateo, just so you know, before we went live here today on the show, I sent you a copy of the recent convention booklet that we put together and sent out on Christmas Day. And I'd forgotten to forward you a copy. It's in your inbox now, but there's an
oh,
entire
okay.
there's an entire transcript of that tribute from Sandy.
Yeah, I was able to download, I think, the video you sent me.
Yeah, I sent you the video, but there's
Yeah,
it's in there as well. It was just that and the tribute to Chris Penfold that was put together,
yeah, that was very
as well
beautiful.
as Rosie Badgett. They were all very, very special moments during that convention weekend. So, but on a positive note, we're going to see you in a few months in September, coming up in LA, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'll have not too many books to sell, but I'll have copies of the first edition of Survival, with the Barry Morse cover and his forward. That's another story, and year one, and some copies of year two. Very few, but I have about 12, so I may part with a few, signed and unsigned. I think most of them are unsigned, but yeah, I found a box, and so we'll see.
Oh,
What
cool.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. In when I met Johnny Byrne in 2000 at the main mission, not Johnny Byrne, Barry Morse. I told him that we were writing this novel, Survival, by Brian Ball, and that I had asked Brian Ball to name the character that Bergman falls in love with, um, Yendis, which is Sydney spelled backwards,
Yep.
and then John Muir suggested that when Bergman has this flashback to his wife's death in a car accident, that we name her Dorothy, which was Sheldon, Sydney's real name.
Oh,
Barry
okay.
Morse's wife's name was actually Dorothy, but her acting name was
Sydney.
Sydney.
Sydney Morse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we honored both the actress and his. We named the. And so I told him before we do this, I said I would like your permission. And when I laid the story out to him and everything, he said I'd be honored.
Wow.
And then later on, he wound up writing the foreword for the novel, and then he recorded the audiobook of Resurrection,
Mm.
which was really
Excellent.
funny. We had a hard time selling them, and it's like it should be like this major thing, but eventually we sold them.
Well, very nice, very nice. And then to segue into another shout out, and I'm going to make John Kenneth Muir the connection there. Roy, you're going to have John on an upcoming show.
Yes. So on the next Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi Corner, which will be tomorrow, which will be today when this episode premieres, literally, we will be on at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And John's going to be joining me to discuss his new web series, which has been getting a lot of awards too. And it's called Abnormal Fixation. So it's really, really good. I actually have had the pleasure of seeing the first episode to preview. And he's definitely put a lot of care into this, and very excited to have the opportunity to talk to him and about it, and just letting the folks know out there. So please tune in. John's a great guy, as Mateo was saying. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting John the very first time in 1999. In fact, he was doing a discussion about, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I believe it was Force of Life, or we were talking about, it was one of the episodes, and it was a very deep discussion about Space 1999, and we were in a room, with probably about maybe 15 or 20 people. It was, he was on for the convention, and and Exploring Space 1999 was his first book, I believe, and now, fast forward, he's done about at least 34 books, if I'm not mistaken. Plus, he's done the audiobooks. And Mateo, you were saying earlier too, you've worked with John, of course, with everything that you've done, and now he's doing the web series. So it's really cool, and he's really just a great down to earth guy. So definitely tune in, and that'll be tomorrow night, which will be today at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Very, very, very loyal. A pleasure to work with. Yeah, he did some short stories for Shepherd Moon, and he wrote 2 original novels. It's funny. When we published year 2, which was like 1985, John was still a few years away from having time to write his year 2 novel, with the Whispering Sea.
Hmm.
But if you read year 2, it it tells you in the Exiles of the events of John's novel 3 years before he wrote it.
Oh wow.
He gave me like the outline, and so we included them reminiscing about this adventure between the Metamorph and the Exiles, and the planets named. All the things are, it's not, it doesn't go into depth, but it's all there.
That's so cool.
We planned it out years in advance. It's one of those funny things.
Awesome, awesome. Well, listen, a couple other quick notes that are coming to my mind on Voyager's return, actually, and I just glanced at the photo behind us. Another great episode from a model and effects perspective. The design of the Sidon ships, I just love it. I just very very everybody's described them as being very insect-like in design, and that can actually be applied to the Eagle itself. I remember an interview with Brian Johnson saying that he sort of designed it that way, but the model of the Voyager was incredible, and again, just simply an extension of the technology we knew at the time. Like, it looked very like something that if you were in the 1970s and projected 10 years into the 80s, you could see something like that traveling out into space. Very very cool design, and the episode overall. And I'm going to circle back to the earlier conversation about the earlier draft for this having something to do with um, the Voyager wanting to become a sentient life form of some kind. Wow, shades of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Agreed. I totally agree.
True. And the same thing is a probe named Voyager sent out to gather information and bring the information home and gather so much information that it wants to go to the next step. I mean, that's right on the nose.
Picture. I mean, yeah, yeah, exactly. It's very, very familiar.
It's funny. There are certain things in Space 1999, like any series, where maybe some modern CGI tweaks would just help a little bit. For example, the dripping liquid from the thruster.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention that, because I have a friend who's a digital artist who fixed that. It's one of those things that always bothered him. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, ITV should do so, because everybody would buy them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the Star Trek, the original series, and you could have both versions.
Yep.
I'd be the first one plunk down the money.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have to do much. I'm not saying change the story, just change certain little things, just to, that just they couldn't deal with they couldn't fix at the time,
Yeah, it would be an enhancement, so to speak. Nothing too drastic.
Oh no, the effects stand up so well. There's no need for them to do like a ground up reconstruction, but just those little things, like when you can see the odd string or wire that's supporting the model, right?
Yep, I agree. And the one that always bothered me was in Black Sun, and I realized the idea of the asteroid, you want to say whatever you want to say, coming close to Alpha, but that whoop was it didn't really make much sense in terms of how close they were to the object at the black hole at the time, because it just somebody said this is what it's going to do, and somebody made that special effect happen, but ultimately it was very unconvincing. It should have been like passing slightly, and just
it should have been, because the moon itself would have actually been dragged into the black sun then.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't add up with that, but it's one of those things that we kind of like, we're like, okay, we kind of like nod our head to, but yeah, definitely.
Bringing it back to Voyager's return, if you notice the zones on the screen, when it gets to this, when it gets to that, ultimately it doesn't make any sense. We had to rewrite it. Patricia Sokol had to rewrite it because, they're already at the critical level, and they say, well, we just have to get to the actual critical. It's like, ultimately, it just, the script and then the design on the set didn't really match up. That was one of the things as well.
There's actually a I'll say like you can almost say a blooper, but it's a dialogue blooper, because the three eagles that were in space initially were 6, 9, and 10, and Koenig says for them to keep the eagles out there. So you don't none of the eagles do come back to Alpha. But then what happens is later on when they're being referenced, it's referenced as 4, 6, and 10, and they reference it as 4, 6, and 10 twice. So there was some kind of continuity issue there where they, they overlooked it when they were doing the review of the script, because it went from 6, 9, and 10 to 4, 6, and 10.
We noticed that. We fixed that in the year one omnibus. We said, wait a minute, what's going on here?
So something happened to Eagle 9. In fact, that's the only time we actually hear of Eagle 9 in Space 1999, if memory serves.
Oh, well, that's beyond my knowledge.
And the other thing is, which was really incredible, and it's a wonderful detail, and I never picked it up as far as watching it just on regular television. However, with high def, with the Blu-rays, when they are in the experimental lab and Victor is in with Queller, they're in the one room, but the room behind them actually has a schematic or a blueprint of the eagle that's hanging. And it's clear that you can make it out that it is the eagle, and it is very, very cool. And I that is something I picked up on probably within the last several months, just rewatching the episode. But I had never, ever caught that before. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God. And then I'm like, rewinding, and I'm like, trying to, enhance it. And sure enough, it is definitely the eagle, and it's in the background, and it's just like pinned. And I was like, wow, that is just like so freaking cool.
The Voyager interior always struck with as well, and an interesting tidbit with Queller says at one point, as you can see, Commander, the Voyager was originally designed to be a manned spacecraft.
Right.
Why would they have gone, just from a production standpoint, why would they have designed a set and thrown those seats in there just I'm glad they did, because it ties into Dragon's Domain when they reuse the set, right?
Right.
But it just seemed like a strange thing to even incorporate into the design of the set.
Well, I think, where else would he have to sit at the end when he takes the ship?
Of course, yeah. He just plops right down and off he goes. Yeah, of course. Good point.
You wouldn't want to see him rolling through Alpha with a chair.
Oh boy, that's funny. And it's funny. It just thought of something. There's some science fiction shows that I watched in the last number of years, and it's so funny. I'm looking behind me, and I've got one of those video game chairs. I quite often see these in science fiction nowadays as futuristic looking chairs on spacecraft, of all things.
Yeah, I thought it was a very solid episode. In terms of novelization, John Rankin's first book, which was the what is it?
Moon Odyssey.
Moon Odyssey. As a reader, I think a lot of us thought he did a better job at making the episode novelizations close to the episodes. But it wasn't really that. It was more that he was given later drafts. And there wasn't as much difference between the drafts he was given.
Right.
He maybe have given almost final drafts to write those episodes. And so that's why the novelization of the episodes in Moon Odyssey are very close to the filmed episodes, because I think, they're almost identical. Almost identical. So his novelization of A Voyager's Return is like, you really get a feel. You're like, I remember that scene. I remember that scene.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. So yeah, it's all based on the source material, of course.
Which we would not have known back in the day. So it's interesting when, having that knowledge, or having that having to be able to be have access to that knowledge, so that it pretty much allows us to kind of fill in the pieces, which is
Well,
really
yeah,
cool.
you can go back and say, okay, well, it's not that so and so was maybe doing a better job, but
Yeah.
the other author just simply wasn't provided as accurate of information.
That's the same thing with the James Blish books. I mean, the early books have a lot more stories than the later books, and they tend to be very short. And in one case, I think it was the what is the name of the episode where they have those little creatures that grab onto your back.
Oh,
Operation
Operation
Annihilate.
Annihilate.
Operation Annihilation. He changed the ending in the book, and after he did it, he said, "I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to respect the scripts as they are."
Yeah. Well, Who Mourns for Anadeus with Carolyn Palamas. There's a scene that was conceived where they go back to the Enterprise, and it just doesn't end where Kirk and McCoy are talking about, would have it killed them to, gather a few laurel leaves, and then the episode ends. They go back to the Enterprise, and then what happens is McCoy's reporting to Kirk and Spock saying that Carolyn Palamas is sick, and it's that she has morning sickness, and that essentially she's pregnant with
Oh,
Apollo's
wow.
baby. And that was something that was also yeah, these earlier drafts are amazing. So that's why, even with Space 1999, we're circling back. I remember in Breakaway, I think at the end of the novelization for Breakaway, Koenig is having a discussion with Carter and says, now you're getting your wish, only now you've included all the men and women, the 311 men and women of Moonbase Alpha, to be a part of this exploration or something. It just kind of sticks in my mind. And I'm thinking, that was never said in the episode, but again, it could have been something that was, in an earlier draft.
It's interesting. You were talking about there would be a project where Voyager was being constructed on the moon, Voyager 2.
Yep.
And I did not, it never occurred to me that the Voyager accident happened on the moon.
It never, same here, Mateo. I always thought you hear a small, community was wiped out, but then what makes more sense of it being on the moon, when I found out about this, is that when you think community, you're thinking thousands in a town, or it would only be like 200 people. So it totally makes sense that a community being like a scientific community being on the moon. And I always thought the same thing as you. It's like, okay, it was on, they try to launch it from Earth, and then it went wrong and this happened.
Yeah. We wrote that in that way as well I think it was that way in the original novelization, so we didn't change it.
Yeah.
But in the year one omnibus, we created Moonbase Beta,
Yeah.
where there was a base closer to the nuclear waste area, but they were secret research base trying to develop space travel using mass nullification. So if you can nullify the mass, like a warp field, you can then make the craft go faster, as close to the speed of light as you like, because you don't have that increasing mass. And but that the research had been pioneered by Bergman, but then he abandoned it because he said this is a dead end. But the government kept funding it because the people kept telling them, "No, we can make this work. We can make this work." So that when Breakaway happens, their base is devastated, and those survivors from Beta come to live on Alpha, like literally within a day of the episode ending. And it created first of all, a good story, because
Yep.
you get to see Koenig go to Meta to
Yeah.
explore the base, to give them hope that we're still explorers, we can still fulfill our purpose, and because people are in despair. But it also added a certain number of individuals, about 60 survivors from Moonbase Beta, so that when you get to the metamorph and Helena says how many people are on the base, it actually adds right up. If you read the Powys books and everything, we killed just that many people, so that when you get to metamorph, that's the number. How
close that can with a
anal?
257.
How much more anal can we be?
because
That's
things like
awesome,
this
though.
matter 50 years later. I love it.
That's great.
Because
Wow.
they killed so many people in year one that there's no way
Yeah.
there was 200 and that was it 98 people. By
Yep.
seriously, I mean, how did that happen? But
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
anyway,
Well, fellas, listen, I think we've had a really, really good chat and discussion here again tonight. We appreciate your time, Mateo, especially. It's always a pleasure reconnecting and seeing you, my friend. And we look forward to seeing each other real soon in a few months' time as well.
well, I was honored to be invited, and I hope I didn't talk too much, but um, uh, it's always fun. Always fun to talk about
No,
the
it
series.
was it was our honor to have you on the show, Mateo, and I'm glad we got to connect this way. So this is great, and also you've made it very exciting for me to look forward to some interesting reading down the road once I can just make some extra time and get a hold of those novelizations. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, yeah. I read them in any order, but I urge you to go to our website. We still have the chronology up there, and there's a guy named Michael Leonard who's reading every short story and novel actually in chronological order in universe, and you'll see so many connections there that if you read things out of order, you don't necessarily get. But
So
here's one interesting thing. I'll let you go before we go. Did you ever notice when we put the episodes of year two together into the omnibus, we followed the status report dates? Maya's abilities increase and amplify episode by episode from beginning of the series to the end.
hmm.
It's very, very interesting. Her ability to change from one creature to another that she couldn't do in the rules of Luton, she can do later. The one
Right.
hour limit, the 1 hour limit goes away.
Yep.
She's developing her skills, and we didn't do it. It actually, if you watch the episodes in the production order, you will see that her abilities become greater and greater as the time goes on.
No,
Anyway,
and you know what? We were referencing the lambda factor before. I'm just thinking about when she was a monkey because of what Carolyn Powell was doing, and then she makes her change into a caterpillar, and she doesn't change back into Maya. She changes directly into the caterpillar. That's just one thing that comes to my mind right away. So
and the danger to her is a lack of oxygen, not a lack of time.
right, exactly. Yes, exactly. That's yeah. Because in Rules of Luton, Koenig is like trying to, urge them, saying, she'll be crushed because she can only hold that shape for 1 hour. It wasn't that she could change into something else.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because in Seance Spectre, which is a very late episode, she becomes a tree for the whole voyage back.
Yep, 3 hours. It was a 3-hour trip.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah. You know what I always thought of that? And it's funny you mentioned that. I always thought, okay, when she, when it hits the hour point, she's changing back into Maya and then she's turning into a tree again. So I was thinking in my mind, the workaround was that she would have to change 3 times. That's actually how I thought of that back when I was originally watching it, because I was thinking that same thing. It's like, how was she able to do that? Because she can't hold the form. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, there you go, Roy. I mean, all you need to do is read the Powys Universe books now to fix all the plot holes and limitations. Mateo, I have one final question for you on that.
Sure.
In the Powys verse, did you guys fix the fact that there were sliding windows in Koenig's office in The Last Sunset?
No, because we all know that was not an error. I think we did write in the scene where Koenig has them installed and the technicians are leaving. I think we
Deleted scene. Yeah.
Yeah, we put that deleted scene back in.
That's the ongoing joke that's carrying over from last week's episode, Mateo, because we just discussed that episode 11 was.
It's the one comment in fandom that just makes me go, oh, again.
Oh, awesome. Well, okay. I think on that note, we'll wrap up then for this episode. Thank you very much again to Roy Belquist, Mateo Latosa. I'm Warren. And if you haven't yet, a reminder to everybody out there on YouTube to like and subscribe our new channel, and it'll help increase the YouTube algorithm so more people see this, and we can continue and complete our goal of discussing all 48 episodes, plus the unofficial 49th message from Moonbase Alpha, and maybe something else coming out beyond that in a few months' time. So thank you very much to everybody. And Mateo, we'll see you in a few months at the big Los Angeles convention. Everybody stay safe out there as well.
Take care, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
And prosper.
Until tomorrow.
Which episode is next week, real quick?
Next week is episode 13. It is Collision
Course. Oh boy, that's a good
one.
One of my favorites. Okay, well, great. Thanks again, Mateo, and we'll see you guys and everybody out there real soon. Okay.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye for now.